British media and EU skeptics are looking at the Federal Council's termination of negotiations on the framework agreement through the lens of Brexit. Some even speculate about a new alliance between Bern and London and fail to recognize that Switzerland does not even want to terminate its existing treaties with the EU. There have been real and supposed parallels between Brexit and Switzerland's struggle for the framework agreement with the EU in recent years. In Brussels, the officials dealing with the two files worked closely together. In Bern, people closely monitored whether the British would wrest concessions from the EU that would also be of interest to Switzerland. In the end, Boris Johnson was able to avert the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, but secured significantly worse market access than Switzerland. Finally, in London, there is a fundamental interest in Switzerland's status as a non-EU member. But since a Brexit based on the model of Switzerland's bilateral path was never seriously considered for either London or Brussels, the British public's knowledge of bilateralism remained very superficial. This was also evident in the reaction to last week's decision by the Swiss Federal Council to end the negotiations on the framework agreement with the EU. There were no official statements from the government or high-ranking parliamentarians. In the relevant circles of the Brexiteers, however, the Swiss not coming up framework agreement was received as a defeat for Brussels and therefore with great joy. "I congratulate Switzerland for fighting against the bullying of the EU," tweeted Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor-in-chief of the tabloid Sun. And the campaign website Brexit Facts wrote, "The Swiss reject the dictatorial EU treaty, 7 years of negotiations for the cuckoo." Not only the tabloids are looking at the Swiss no to the framework agreement through the Brexit glasses. The Brexit-friendly Daily Telegraph also wrote that the EU, with its intransigence on the controversial issue of EU Citizens Directive and wage protection, had repeated the same mistakes as in the Brexit negotiations, where closer ties with the UK would have been possible with a little more willingness to compromise. Even the Financial Times, critical of Brexit, commented that the Schwexit would cause considerable disadvantages for Switzerland because of the threat of erosion on the bilateral path, but that it would also be a blow for the EU. Losing the largest European trading partner in Great Britain can still be seen as a mishap, but if the second largest partner is also lost, it seems like negligence, but they are not lost. Many Brexiteers do not seem to have understood that, even after the rejection of the framework agreement, Switzerland remains much closer to the EU than the UK for the time being, and that the Swiss Federal Council is not looking for an alternative to the bilateral path. It is now becoming more and more likely that Switzerland will give up its 123 treaties with the EU, turn its back on the EU internal market and choose a free trade agreement with the EU similar to that of Great Britain, said former Conservative MEP David Benjamin, so he has really no clue. The suggestion made by the author and financial columnist Matthew Lynn in the Conservative Spectator was also quite bizarre. He pleaded for an alternative European single market consisting of Great Britain and Switzerland, with free movement of people, goods and services, and completely harmonized regulation in the financial sector. It remained open who exactly would issue the common rules and what advantages such a construct would have for Switzerland, which is economically much more closely linked with its neighboring countries in the EU market. It therefore remains to be seen whether Switzerland and Great Britain will move closer together. The British ambassador in Bern, Jane Owen, did not want to comment on the Federal Council's decision on Swiss media, but said that London was looking for cooperation with Bern. Regardless of the decision of the framework agreement, there are efforts to deepen the cooperation. Owen mentioned the areas of services, financial sector and research, with Great Britain participating in the EU research program Horizon Europe. Owen also emphasized that London would not ally itself with Bern against the EU, and Switzerland too is exercising caution. The British are stubborn negotiating partners who pursue their own interests and do not distribute gifts. And if the Swiss Federal Council does not completely offend Brussels, they can only hardly give the impression that it is aiming for an alliance with Great Britain. Even if the EU has no interest in declaring the existing treaties with Switzerland to be obsolete, Brussels is trying to get the British into a treaty modeled on the veterinary agreement between Switzerland and the EU, which would make border controls for animals and animal products between Northern Ireland and the British Isles superfluous. After the Swiss no to the framework agreement, EU representatives immediately emphasized that the bilateral veterinary agreement would remain in force. Unlike Switzerland, however, the British government has so far considered it unreasonable in terms of sovereignty policy to follow EU veterinary rules without having a say. Well, if you leave the political parts of the EU, what happened much earlier, of course you have no say anymore. Shit happens.